Yeah.
Okay, we will go ahead and get started, everybody. So I'm Justin Bailey, one of the program managers for Gates. We definitely wanted to have this event for you all so we can answer those frequently asked questions that a lot of you have. We want to thank you for tuning in. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. I know many of you may have some personal questions that will need to be resolved on a more one-on-one basis. So we'll definitely direct those questions to the specific program, in addition to making sure that we get those questions answered. So we are live via Facebook, as well as this will be recorded. So you can tell everybody who could not make it that they'll definitely still be able to tune in and get the information that they need. So I'll step aside. I'll have our panelists just introduce themselves. We'll just go in order of our slide presentation, and then I'll come back on and then we'll get started. So Melissa.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Melissa May, and I'm the director of the Gates Millennium Scholars Program at APIA Scholars. Happy to be here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jay Cohn. I'm the Senior Relationship Manager at the UNCF office. I'm very happy to be part of this as well.
Hello, everyone. This is Gabriel Bell. I'm the Campus Engagement Manager in the South region for the Gates Millennium Scholars Program. I'm at the American Indian Graduate Center. I'm originally from Guam, so I do want to give a shout out to all our Chamorros out there in Guam, as well as our Arapaho scholars and Native scholars. But thank you for joining us today. We hope we can give you some good information. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Mireya Saldaña, the Campus Engagement Manager with GMS. I've been with the program for about 8 years, and I typically work with scholars and institutions in California, but really throughout the country. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to be of service to you in the near future.
Awesome. So guys, we're going to be talking about everything: renewals, deferments, any graduate inquiries, anything about any academic opportunities, or support that you may need. So guys, stay with us, bear with us. Hopefully within each segment of the presentation, we will be able to answer your question. If your question, however, does not get answered, and it is pretty general that we can kind of answer over the airwaves as we are, please feel free to let me know. I'm currently monitoring Zoom and Facebook. I'll be keeping a running agenda of the questions. So when we get to that Q&A portion, we want to make sure that we leave you guys with everything that you came here to receive. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Melissa, and we'll get started on everything about the renewals.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. If we could go to the next. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I am here today to talk about the renewal process and how to request renewal or whatever you're going to request. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that our funding eligibility requirements, talk about our funding eligibility requirements, and then also highlight that our priority deadline this year is on July 17th, 2020. So that does not mean that you can't submit a request after that, but just note that there might be delays in funding and your award disbursement after that. So really try to get your requests in by that priority deadline. In order to be eligible to request your funding, you need to file FAFSA by your institution's priority deadline. Even if you're attending graduate school, all scholars need to file a FAFSA. And so these last two things, Mireya will also talk about later on in the presentation, but you also need to be financial aid eligible as determined by your institution, and then also full-time enrolled unless you will be graduating at the end of that particular term. And then meeting satisfactory academic progress, and that is also determined by your institution. So those are just kind of the baseline eligibility requirements to request funding through the portal. So, all right, so getting through kind of the step-by-step process, and some of you have probably already started submitting your request for funding, but the very first step is to go to gmsp.org, and you'll see a screenshot of that here. You go to portals at the top of the homepage, and then select for scholars and alumni. And then once you enter your username and password and log in, note that your username for your student portal was included in your renewal invitation. If you need that reset, contact the GMS administrative office to have a new email address on file. If you forget your password, click on the forget password link. And if you don't receive that password reset link, go ahead and contact your GMS admin office as well. And we'll be happy to get that situated for you. All right, go to the next slide. Awesome. Okay, so then from your Scholar homepage, you'll click on your, sorry, I'm losing myself in my notes here. Yes, process request for funding. Even if you're not requesting funding and you're requesting deferment or termination instead, you'll still want to click on that process request for funding. And then you'll want to click to select funding, deferment, or time off from studies, which is what Jay will talk more on next, or termination. So if you're terminating, that might be because you're entering the workforce or pursuing graduate school outside of the funded areas. But note that if you do request funding or to discontinue your scholarship, that is a permanent end to your GMS funding. So just something to be aware of. So the next step is to go through all of the fields that are required for when you're submitting a request. Review that authorization statement, do your e-signature on your request, and then click next, and that submits your request. Okay, so now that you've submitted your request, you need to upload your official transcript. So the next step is to go back to those current requested actions in your student portal. Click on Upload Document-Transcript. And there is where you can upload a legible, official, cumulative transcript on your student portal. Note that we no longer accept grade reports, enrollment summaries, academic advisement forms in lieu of your transcript. Also note that if your transcript office or the office on your campus where you usually request your transcripts from is currently closed, contact your administrative office with GMS and we can talk about a solution. Also a note when you're submitting transcripts that all of our current partner offices, at least at this point in time, are working remotely. So it is probably in your best interest to send an electronic transcript, request an electronic transcript and upload it. If that's not an option on your campus, which we hear about a lot, you can request to have that transcript mailed to your home and then scan it and then upload it. And also a pro tip is that in your iPhone, in your Notes app, you can scan it instead of taking a picture. Learned that last year. So if you don't have access to a scanner, you can go ahead and use your phone. Okay, so then if you're entering a new institution, like you're either transferring schools as an undergrad or perhaps you're starting a graduate program, we'll need to have either an admissions letter if you're in an undergrad program or in a program acceptance letter if you're a graduate student. So this is where you would also upload those things. You can also reach out to your administrative office to let them know that you're changing institutions so that we can go ahead and add that requested action so that you can then upload your official transcript. Or sorry, not your official transcript, your acceptance letter or admissions letter. Apologies. Okay, so this is probably one of the reasons that brought a lot of you to this, this webinar this afternoon or this evening for you. So there are a handful of issues that have been coming up as scholars have been requesting funding, and some of these might apply to you. So we just wanted to kind of pull these out and let you know kind of the course of action for how we're going to address them. So the first one being the unhandled fault error, and there's a screenshot of what it looks like in your student portal. And so this one comes up when scholars are starting at a new institution. So either you're going into a graduate school program and that school is different than the school that you were at as an undergrad, or maybe you're transferring undergraduate institutions. And so If you experience that fault error, contact your GMS administrative office. And then what we'll do is we will go in and change your institution manually on our end. And then you'll be able to go through and submit your request like usual. The second thing that we see coming up is request for funding. Your requested action remains even after you've submit your request for funding. So you go through the renewal process, you think everything's good to go, and then when you come back to your requested actions page, it still says requested action next to process request for funding. So that is something that we're also aware of in another situation where you would contact your GMS admin office, who can change that status request to request complete. And then that way that closes that out for you. And then the last thing that we're noticing is the incorrect academic classification. So you go through the request for funding process, you submit your renewal request, and then you notice that the academic classification listed for you is not your current academic classification. And instead, it's the one that was listed the last time you received GMS funding. So as the same with the first two options, contact your GMS admin office, who will then update your academic classification so that we have your accurate classification listed on file. Okay. Yeah. All right, and since I've been referring to contacting your GMS admin offices so frequently, I wanted to also take time to highlight what that contact information is for each of the partner offices so that you know exactly who to contact if you're running into some of these issues with your requests for funding. Okay. Yep. So I'll kick it over to Jay, who will talk more about the deferment process.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. All right, this is going to be deferment light. We don't really have a whole lot of time today to go through everything, so I'm going to just kind of skim over the process because in your portal, you'll have the deferment packet, and it spells out everything you'll need to know. But the one thing in that packet that is really helpful is the chart of the deferment types. And if we could change the next slide. Okay, so we have basically 3 categories of deferments. And each category has a couple or more different types of deferments. The first kind is the circumstantial deferments, which include medical or service deferment. Medical basically should be used when you have a medical issue that's preventing your enrollment or preventing you from being full-time. Yes, pregnancy is considered a medical condition. Although it says maximum duration not available, in fact, we ask that you renew every year. This is for any type of deferment, you must always renew every year. You'll need to provide documentation and an official transcript. Service is specific for when you are participating in a required religious missionary service, a federally administered program such as Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, or U.S. military service. And if there's any question about whether or not a program is eligible, you can check with us. The key here is required if you're going for religious missionary service. We do not offer it for voluntary service. Now note that the maximum duration is up to 2 years. Again, you must renew it each year. Documentation needed will be a letter of support and always an official transcript. Can we get the next slide? Okay, discretionary deferments are basically 3 different types. These are when you need time for your own purposes. Academic is when you are not eligible for funding or you have exhausted your funding at your current level, or if you're part-time when the requirement is full-time, if you're on academic suspension or ineligible for federal aid. In this case, you will need to provide a transcript. In some cases, we may also ask you for enrollment verification if in fact you are enrolled. Personal hardship will accommodate a temporary crisis, such as a family obligation or personal decision. And note that we mentioned that medical will include personal medical issues. If it's a family medical issue, medical deferment cannot be used. It will have to be a personal hardship deferment. And transitional deferment is when you need time after you've graduated and you're in between programs. If you want to gain work experience or take academic preparation courses such as post-baccalaureate coursework. And notice that the maximum duration for each of these or in combination is up to 1 year. So very important that you note that the combined maximum duration, you'll note at the top says, is the combined maximum duration of a scholar's discretionary deferment is 1 year. Now, this is the one type of deferment or one category of deferments where we will consider a deferment extension, and I'll come back to talk about that. But for now, let's move to the next slide. Okay, these are the graduate deferments. These are when you have completed your undergraduate, and in order to get ready for deferments, or when they're to get ready for the rigor of your graduate studies, additional time needed. Now, teaching in public health is a single category of deferment. If you are pursuing public health or if you're going into education, you are allowed a maximum of 3 years. This will require verification of your employment. And note that whenever we ask for verification of employment or enrollments or any kind of documentation that is time sensitive, it must be current and dated. So if you provide a letter of verification that's a year old, we'll come back and ask you to submit something that's current to show you're still employed. So for teaching, we will also consider education administration or school guidance counseling. Excuse me here, I have a dog who's sniffing at my dinner. Public health is work experience. In any case, teaching or public health work must be full-time or close to full-time to be considered as eligible. We've had some questions about master's funding, and master's deferment is granted only in one circumstance. That's when you have pursued an eligible master's degree program. You've been funded for 2 years, but you still have time that you have to complete your program. You may request master's deferments. It's eligible for up to 1 year. You will need to provide current enrollment verification. MD deferment is when you are enrolled in a previously approved combination MD, PhD, or MD, MPH program. The program must be pre-approved. It must be an existing program where both the MD and the MPH or the PhD are offered as a single entity. And you will be funded only for the PhD or the MPH portion, but you may take MD deferment for the remaining time when you're in medical school. We do require verification from your dean, and in subsequent years, and we require enrollment verification. And finally, doctoral deferment is when we are accommodating the time that you're in a doctoral program, you want to postpone your funding because you have funding from your department or from an outside entity, such as National Science Foundation. We will allow you to request doctoral deferments because you have full funding, and you may request that for a maximum of 3 years. Note that this is only available at the doctoral level. Okay. The big question that everybody is asking about is what if you want to go beyond the time that is available to you for deferment time? And I noticed in the questions that people submitted beforehand, people are particularly concerned about what will happen because of the current health crisis. And they may need more time. And I want to address specifically what happens when you need more time. And particularly, I want to make sure everybody understands that we will grant deferment extensions in certain cases, but we will require a good deal more documentation. And this is spelled out in the packets that's in your portal. If you need more time, the committee will review your request. It is an appeal for more time, and we will ask you for documentation and explanation of why you need the additional time. And we will also ask you for a timeline of what your anticipation is to return to funded education, and whether or not you have approved graduate programs in place. And that's critical, because if you're not documenting that you have plans for funded education, the committee is not going to be as inclined to approve. Now, I wanted to talk a little more about what's happening with the committee when they review your appeal for more deferment time. And it's important that you understand that we look at this in the big picture. And understand that at this point, if you're not already aware, that 8 years from now, we will be entering the last year of funding for the Gates Millennium Scholars Program. After that year, there is no more funding. So when you are asking for more deferment time, we want to know what your plans are to continue your education. And we want to make sure your plans can be accommodated within the remaining time that the program is available to you. Now, if you are in certain programs where your plans are, you're going to pursue 2 years of a master's degree and then go into 4 years of a doctoral program, that's fine. We can accommodate that. That's 6 years. As we noted, you have 8 years till we enter the final year of the program. But if you are going into a public health or an education program at the doctoral level, there's generally a requirement in some programs that you have a number of years of work experience. And that's why we offer the teaching or public health deferments for a maximum of 3 years. So if you are now have graduated from your undergraduate, you're looking to go into a master's program, but you're taking this year off, what are your plans to go beyond that? Are you planning to pursue a doctoral program in public health or education? In which case, if you take 2 years now and then 3 years of deferment, you're not going to have enough time in the doctoral program before the funding runs out. So plan carefully and look at your big picture. And when we come to the question and answer, I'll be happy to answer any of the questions about your specific circumstances. But by all means, think about your plans, and we'll be glad to look at them and counsel you as best we can. And that'll conclude my portion here, and I'm going to turn this over to Gabe. Gabriel Bell.
Thanks, Jay. And then I think, thank you for passing that on. I think that's a good segue. I think, you know, with considering the 28-29 academic year for being the final year of the program, it's important to really plan your time with a scholarship well. So that brings us to our graduate program inquiries. For many of us scholars, of you scholars that are currently out there, you're either at the end of your undergraduate program or have already entered into your graduate program. So this talks about a little bit about that. As many of you know, the Gates Scholarship Program is set to fund you in 7 funded areas at the graduate level. And these are the 7 funded areas: computer science, education, engineering, library, information science, mathematics, public health, and science. So as you begin to think about your plans for the future, whether you're going from a master's to a doctoral PhD program, or from an undergraduate to a master's program, these are the areas that GMS funds. You can always refer back to your GMS guidelines. It begins on page 31. The administrative guidelines are located in your scholar profile. It's actually one of the 3 buttons you can press at the top of your scholar profile, so you can access those readily today if you like. You can go over each area of the 7 funded areas. They're covered from pages 33 to 37. So as you're thinking about what graduate program you want to pursue, each of the areas are covered, pages 33 through 37 of the administrative guidelines, and the criteria that's involved is located there. So what I've provided for you today is just a small example. I'm just going to cover the education field, and the graduate program inquiries that are submitted under this field follow this criteria. Again, the other 6 funded areas are covered in the same pages that I just cited. So if you want to go ahead and look at that, you can. But this kind of gives you an idea of how graduate programs are reviewed and approved under the criteria that GMS has set forth. So when you look at education, which is one of our higher submissions for graduate program inquiries, you see that there's 4 areas that are assessed. So when you're thinking about which graduate program you want to pursue, you want to think about, does my graduate program fit the criteria that's set forth by GMS? So here, there's 4 of them. One of them is, are you pursuing a master's, an education specialist, or doctoral degree in the field of education? 2, is your degree program, is it within the school, college, or department of education? Or is the degree that you're pursuing specifically titled as such? So there's a number of different types of degrees that are listed here. Number 3, is your graduate program preparing you for a teaching career or for a career in the field of education? And number 4, is your graduate program in the field of education is included in this paragraph here, which is sort of a general definition, but it does give you an idea of what the criteria is set forth for the education field. So this sort of gives you an idea of what, when you submit a graduate program inquiry, how it's reviewed and the criteria that it's reviewed by. In addition to this, we take this criteria in addition to the curriculum that you list in the inquiry, the program description, as well as all the information that's associated to the graduate program, all into account. And so it all must fall in line with the criteria that's set forth by GMS. A lot of questions that sometimes follow are, is this program eligible? Is it not eligible? Based on title, that's not sufficient enough information to assess a review. So you can sometimes get some feedback from a partner organization if you're in contact with somebody, but I certainly suggest you submit a graduate program inquiry for an official review and official response for the type of graduate program that you're looking at, whether it's master's, PhD, or doctoral programs. How do you submit the graduate program inquiry form? So here you can see, once you log into your Scholar profile, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of your profile, there's a few links listed, and the graduate program inquiry link is there at the bottom towards the left of the screen. If you click that, it'll allow you to go ahead and go through a number of prompts. These are all pretty straightforward, but I would encourage you to enter the information as requested. If it's asking for a program link, please be specific in the program link that you're providing. Sometimes you might be, submitting a graduate program inquiry form for a particular program, but you're giving the general graduate program department. So that sometimes leads to additional time in the review. So I just want to just recommend and suggest that you provide the specific program link that goes directly to the program that you're looking for specifically, and the concentration that is associated with, if that's applicable. This gives you a general timeline of the graduate program inquiry process. So just for example, if you're looking at a program to start in the fall, which you do want to start a master's program in the fall versus the summer. Again, with the GMS program, we don't fund programs at the graduate level that begin in the fall, or excuse me, in the summer. It has to start in the fall or the spring. This particular timeline is set for a fall projection. So I always recommend, and we've recommended in the past to GATE scholars, to submit your graduate inquiry by March 1st if you're looking at starting a program in the fall term. The review process can typically take 4 to 8 weeks. It can take longer just depending on the time of the academic year. So if it's a busy time of the year, it may take longer. You may find that it could get processed in 2 weeks, but that gives you a general idea of that. Once it's reviewed, you're going to get an email decision, whether it's approved or denied. And the best case scenario is that occurs prior to renewal. So you want to plan for that. And I know that we're talking about this in June, but this just gives you an idea for those of you that might be planning in the future for a graduate program. Lastly, once you have a graduate program that's been approved through the process, then you can know in confidence that you can submit a request funding for that particular program and concentration. So the other item that's going to be requested once you request funding is a graduate acceptance letter that's been mentioned already. That graduate acceptance letter has to align, again, specifically with the program that's been approved through your graduate program inquiry form, otherwise known as the GPI. And that way that ensures that you're entering the exact program that you're approved for. Considering the processing time, we ask that scholars submit up to 4 inquiries at a time. If you process 1 or 2 more, that's not gonna be a detriment, but you have to consider that there's processing time involved. So the suggested number of inquiries to submit at a time is 4. And this kind of lends to the idea of when you're looking at your graduate program, you kind of want to focus in on what you're interested in. What are the top 4 institutions or programs that you're looking at? That way you have you reduce the review time there. Once those 4 are approved or denied, or there's a decision that's given, then you can submit more after that. Sometimes graduate inquiry forms or GPIs take additional time if there's more information needed. If you don't have a fixed curriculum that's associated with the program, GMS may ask from you an educational timeline or additional documentation to show exactly what coursework that you're taking in that particular program. Other questions may be there, and that might escalate your GPI to upper levels of review. As it goes up, that again adds time to that 4 to 8 week processing time, which is a general guideline. But once that review is finished and complete at the senior level and a decision is given, that's final. And there's no appeals to that process once it comes to that point. Lastly, probably one of the more popular questions comes to is how much can I get funded at the graduate level? As many of you know, GMS does cap the award at the graduate level. So at your undergraduate level, you're able to request funding, and GMS would meet your unmet need based on the information that was provided by the financial aid office. At the graduate level, it occurs in the same way, only that there's a fixed capped amount per academic year. So what you see here at the top is your graduate capped amounts at the private institution and the public institution. Now, this information is always available to you on page, or in your request funding packet. This year, it's listed on page 7. You can always access this from your scholar profile and see what the updated amounts are. Please know that it is also prorated. So if you're only attending the fall term or the spring term, is prorated. So for example, if you're at a public institution and you're only attending the fall term, you can request up to $25,831.15. And that's what the prorated amount is. Now, when it comes around to summer, graduate scholars do have the option to request summer funding, but that's only possible if you have a leftover amount from that capped award. So if you attended for the full year and there's $10,000 left over, then you can request $10,000 for your summer, up to $10,000 for your summer term. If you only attended the fall term for a public institution, then the leftover amount that's left over from the $21,831.15, whatever's left over from that amount can be applied towards your summer funding, and you can request up to that amount. Again, that's covering your unmet need. Lastly, in a situation where you still have an unmet need even after the capped amount, and you still have an unmet need that's left over, we highly recommend that you seek departmental funding that may come in the form of graduate assistantships, research fellowships, or professorial assistantships, where you can gain some additional resources there. These are often helpful in the ways of providing some additional experience, and it may help you in the career sense in that you can create a better network. You can also identify inside scoops on research that's in your field. So there's a lot of advantages for you to also consider other resources beyond GMS. So whether you have an unmet need after the capped amount, or you want to just consider other ways to boost your resume, get more experience, there's always other funding out there and other ways you can get. Also, some other advantages are you are going to get a salary for some of these items, which won't count against your GMS award. You may have access to health insurance, maybe some other tuition waivers, stipends, also internships. So consider that as you're thinking about your graduate school and how you're planning for your master's or your PhD and doctoral terms. So that concludes my portion of the graduate inquiries, and I'll send it over to Maria to talk about academic support.
Great, thanks, Gabe. All right, guys, so next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking to you about academic support and resources for scholars. As Melissa mentioned previously, there are 3 things that you must do in order to remain eligible for GMS funding. The first is you must meet satisfactory academic process, which is also known as SAP. If you don't meet satisfactory academic progress, that means you're not eligible for federal financial aid, which means that you're not eligible for GMS funding. So it's really important that you, as soon as you are notified that you may not be meeting SAP, that you meet with your academic advisor, that you contact GMS to talk about options for you. You're also required to maintain full-time enrollment during the academic school year. This means that usually for undergrads, it's about 12 units. For graduate students, it's typically 9 units, but it can range depending on the institution or the program. So we always go by whatever the registrar deems as full-time. As you know, GMS requires that you submit your official transcripts during renewal during this time. So what we do is we actually look through your transcript, and we look at each term. And if there is a term where you fell below full-time, you will incur a full-time enrollment violation, which is also mentioned in your GMS administrative guidelines. When you incur a full-time enrollment violation, you'll receive a full-time enrollment violation memo from GMS. And we keep track of those violations in your scholar record. So any scholar that repeatedly withdraws from courses and falls below full-time enrollment can jeopardize their future funding. So it's really, really important that you try not to drop courses unless it's absolutely your last resort. If you are at that point where you may have to drop a course, we ask that you follow up with your GMS admin office and talk to someone about sort of what options you may have. But again, we know that sometimes it's impossible not to, and it happens. So again, if you can just avoid not dropping courses, that way it's not counted towards your full-time enrollment violations. There are exceptions to the full-time enrollment policy. They're limited, but there are a few. For example, if you're graduating, let's say that you're graduating this fall and you only need a couple of courses to complete your degree, GMS will allow you to take less than full-time. However, you must remain eligible for federal financial aid. So that means typically that you have to be at least enrolled part-time. So we recommend to reach out to their financial aid office to confirm the number of units that they would have to be enrolled in. The second exception is if you're a graduate student and you're required to teach in a classroom full-time, GMS will allow you to be enrolled less than full-time during the time that you have to teach in the classroom. And thirdly, if you are attending summer school, so for students who are conferring their degrees over the summer, they are eligible for GMS summer funding. You can be enrolled less than full-time. This also applies to graduate students who perhaps have leftover funds from their annual cap and they want to take some summer courses. They can also be enrolled less than full-time. And lastly, for GPAs, even though we don't have a minimum GPA requirement for the program, we definitely take note of your GPA. So we track GPA on an annual basis. As we're reviewing your transcript, we'll look at your term GPA as well as your overall GPA. And we may flag your record if you perhaps had a really bad term, maybe you failed a couple of courses or your GPA fell below 2.0. We may follow up with you and have an academic advisement session just to make sure that you're okay. Want to make sure that you have access to resources on your college campus and just to make sure that you're on the right path. Obviously, with the GMS program winding down, our preference would be that you pursue a graduate program through the program. So we want you to have the best possible GPA. We want you to be in great academic standing so that you have options when you do want to pursue a master's or a PhD program. Now, in terms of available resources for scholars, if a student wants to speak to someone directly, for example, I always make myself available to scholars outside of my region, within my region, I'm always available. If you want to have a conversation about perhaps academics or even graduate school planning, I think that's much more common these days because students are really thinking about grad school. And if you want to understand how funding works, please reach out to your partner GMS admin office and schedule an appointment where we'd be more than happy to talk to you over the phone, via Zoom, on Facebook. I do a lot of my advisement sessions on Messenger as well. So that's definitely an option for you. In the graduate school webinars through Facebook, I think a lot of you have seen a lot of that happening over the past few months since we've been quarantined. So the purpose of that is to really expose you to the funded areas. Oftentimes students, they're unclear as to what they want to do. So these webinars are really meant for you to hear from other scholars, for you to hear from other programs. For example, we recently hosted a webinar from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is very popular for our students. They talked about their programs, students talked about their experience. So those webinars are available to you. If you aren't able to make it live, you can certainly access the recordings later on. We also have a ton of Facebook groups. We have Facebook groups by cohorts. We have them by interest. So we have one for public health. We have one for education. There's one that's for pre-health. So this is mostly for students who want to go to medical school. We also have an official GMS page. And I think a lot of you guys are on that one. I often see a lot of students posing questions on those pages. And I try to monitor as best I can. Just as, just food for thought is that oftentimes students may not know the right answer. So take that as a grain of salt. It's always best to follow up with your partner, your GMS admin office or your GMS guidelines to make sure that the answers that you're receiving are actually accurate, because we can't vouch for what students are telling you, but we can certainly provide that information to you through your partner office. And lastly, you guys the program has funded 20,050 scholars. So it's an amazing alumni network that you have. So we're now currently in our last cohort. There's tons of alum who have gone to graduate school, who've pursued funded areas, who've gotten their masters as well as their PhDs. Many have gone through other programs like professional schools, tons of doctors, you name it. So utilize your network, ask scholars about their programs, talk about their careers, talk to them about their schools that they attended, internships, etc. We want you to, and we want to encourage you to utilize your network and remember that you guys are 20,000 strong. We also have local chapters. There's one in Los Angeles. We have one in San Diego, Boston, New York. So there's quite a few chapters around the country, and that could be also a great resource for you. So that concludes my section, and I think now we're going to open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. So I'll come back on. So I know, guys, that we went through that very pretty quickly. I know hopefully we answered the majority of your questions, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a lot of different questions for the remaining of the time. You can keep them coming in. I'm going to be very, very transparent. We're not going to be able to get every single question, but I'm going to go through as quickly and as thoroughly as I can. So I'll just start off with the question right in front of me. Most post-baccalaureate positions require 2-year terms, yet the discretionary deferment for work experience before entering a PhD is a 1-year max. How can we navigate these conflicting timelines?
I think that would come to me. This is why we have the option of the deferment extension. You need to prepare an appeal, basically explaining and providing documentation of why you need the additional time. And you'll also need to provide the timeline to return to your funded education and make sure that you have submitted the graduate program inquiry form and have approved programs in place. The committee will review, and in general, when there's a good reason, they will generally approve.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. Another question. How does funding work with a program that's considered a consortium program with other institutions? I will be selecting one institution as my home institution. That being said, would I be submitting a GPI for the home school?
Go ahead and answer that one, Justin. This one's a little bit more intricate in the way that it processes, but if you're attending an institution, I think the one main thing that you have to keep in mind is that there is a full-time enrollment requirement. So if you happen to be in a consortium agreement situation where you're attending or you're attending a graduate program, that consortium agreement does have to be in place, so that documentation does need to be provided to that the particular program that you're pursuing, there is an agreement and does justify that there is a full-time requirement met, as well as the program that you're in is accounting those additional courses outside the home institution as part of your program. So that's what I can say about that. If you're in a consortium agreement situation, you do want to make sure you have that consortium agreement paperwork on hand so that you can provide it to GMS.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabe. I have another question that came through. I'm a graduate student. My school's on a trimester schedule. However, my award payments are under a semester basis. How would I go about changing my disbursements from 2 to 3?
That's a little complicated. The short answer is the way our system operates, we can't make that adjustment. So we will try and work with your financial aid office and advise them that because the program is a trimester, but our funding has to happen on a semester basis, we'll need to divide up the quarter so that the funding is offered in one or the other of the 2 semesters. The fact is our system doesn't allow us to make that distinction when a program is different from what the school normally would have set up.
All right. If I'm submitting a deferment for renewal, would I still have to complete a FAFSA?
No.
Awesome. Okay. For work experience deferment, Jay, what should the proof of employment document look like? Will a dated offer letter be enough?
We'd have to look at it. Sometimes a contract, sometimes a letter of agreement, sometimes a note from an administrator or from a human resource office. Well, what it should indicate is that you are employed full-time, that it is dated and current, and it should be apparent from the letter what exactly it is you'll be doing. Sometimes a job description will be required. Sometimes your job title will be sufficient. We'll let you know if we need something more.
Awesome.
Hey, Justin.
Another deferment question. Do I have to be accepted into my doctoral program before applying for the deferment extension?
No, you have to be approved. You have to have the program approved for funding, but you don't need to have applied to it yet.
Awesome. Okay. Switch gears really quickly. Could you speak further into how graduate stipends factor into funding?
Okay, I'll go and take that, Justin. I was actually related to Jay's last response. It reminded me of an item that I overlooked, but this is a good place to talk about it. So with graduate stipends, as it relates to the your GMS award, if you're receiving services for, if you're receiving money for services rendered, you're receiving a salary, that's not going to count against your Gates award. So for the stipend, if it's in effect because of the work that you're doing, that should not affect your Gates award. It should not count against it. So that brings me to the point that I overlooked, which is when you're looking at submitting, and a lot of scholars are doing this, if they're getting involved in a graduate assistantship, which I had already mentioned, and I also still recommend you do if you're getting into a graduate program to pursue a graduate assistantship, to also keep the documentation that's associated to that graduate assistantship. And that's the document that you want to upload as part of your requirement for that particular program. What you're looking for on that graduate assistantship document is basically the contract that you're pursuing, what exactly it covers, any amounts that it's associated as far as your salary goes, any tuition that's given, tuition waivers, any of those type of numbers are going to be the things that GMS needs to look at as far as your awarding process goes. Again, with regard to graduate stipends, if you're receiving a salary or compensation for services that you've rendered, that should not count against your GMS award.
Awesome. Another question: how can scholars request funding for housing, meals, or other living expenses, to GMS in addition to tuition and fees?
I'll answer this. Basically, your financial aid office will set the budget. They will include generally things like room and board, transportation costs, health insurance, personal expenses. This is all part of your budget. And it's entirely up to the financial aid office as to what that budget is. So your best bet at this point is to talk to the financial aid office representative, find out what they budget, and plan accordingly. If you need to have adjustments made because you can't find something that fits within your budget, that conversation has to happen with the financial aid office, not with us, because we can't award beyond what the financial aid office's budget.
Okay, another question came through. What's the timeline for decisions from the Extension Deferment Committee?
It depends on where we are in the renewal process. And it depends on whether or not we have received all the documentation that we need. We try and process them on a rolling basis. But if we're missing some of your documentation, we may have to let your appeal sit on the back burner until we get that documentation. We do try and check in with students who are missing pieces of what's required and let them know that we need that information. And if it gets down towards the end of the renewal cycle, there may be a time crunch because we're processing thousands of students here. Those that are requesting funding plus those who are requesting deferment. It takes a while. And if it becomes an issue, you can always check with us. Let us know what's going on. But keep us in the loop.
Awesome. I'm worried about my school not giving me enough funding for housing. What do I do if it's not covered?
I'll go ahead and take that one. This is Gabriel from AIGCS. One of the things that we always recommend for scholars is to always keep clear and constant communication with the financial aid office. With regard to your cost of attendance as it relates to your off-campus housing or food and meals. If it's not where you think that it needs to be, we always suggest that you enter a conversation with the financial aid office to look at, your current numbers. And if those are negotiable within lines with the cost of attendance that's related to scholars and students at the institution across the board, that may be something that GMS can consider. But anything that's, significantly above what's allowable within the cost of attendance and the policies of the institution, that's not something that GMS will honor. We have to think about your GMS award in the sense of, making sure that it's equitable for all students and scholars that are attending that institution. So that's really the line where GMS draws as far as that negotiation goes. There may be some room for it, so we always encourage scholars to look into that. And if there's a way, and there's an option to increase maybe some amounts that are allowable within that general range, then the scholar or the financial aid office may submit additional information that can account for that additional cost. So in general, you would submit a revision if your award has already been processed and awarded. If that's already been set, then you need to go back and change that because you're living off campus or you change your housing situation. Again, we encourage you to consult your financial aid office to see what is doable, and then once the financial aid office provides that to GMS, then we look at that and ensure that it's in line with the GMS scholarship guidelines. So that's what I can say about that.
Can I add to that
Yeah, sure,
it's a good idea if you're going to a new school where you know that there are other Gates scholars or you think there might be other Gates scholars, it's not a bad idea to try and reach out to them through the scholar community online or through one of the GMS Facebook pages and say, hey, what is your experience in this area? How's the housing costs? Is the budget generally adequate? Or do I need to look into maybe a housing share situation? Or is there an area where I can find cheaper housing that may be a little farther from campus? Best resource is your fellow scholars.
Awesome. Another question. Do we need to have our financial aid award ready when we submit requests for funding for graduate program?
No. Short answer. The financial aid information will come when your school has put it together, but we can't award until we have that's in place.
And I'll go ahead and add to Jay's comment and just say that it's always good, again, as I mentioned before, to maintain that good stream of communication with your financial aid office, kind of go over those numbers so that you're aware of what your financial aid office is reporting to GMS, and so you can plan accordingly.
Okay, just to be sure, if an extended deferment is not approved, but there's a gap before an approved doctoral program begins, are we no longer eligible for GMSP funding for the program?
If the extension's not approved, your options are basically to either enroll at that point in an approved program or to basically be terminated from the scholarship. And let me add that the committee tries to be fair. In general, they're going to review based on a number of circumstances. But if your request is not complete or it's impractical, they're going to say, we can't approve this extra time. And at that point, the most likely option would be to terminate the scholarship for you. So bear in mind that that is a possible outcome, but it's generally a last resort.
Awesome. Just looking at a few more questions as I go through. Can I request a deferment appeal to complete a second master's degree beyond what GMS covers?
We won't fund a second master's degree, and it's unlikely that the committee would approve an extension for you to pursue something that GMS does not fund, unless you can make the case that this particular program is really experience that you need to help you get into an approved doctoral program. And that's something you're just going to have to build a case to try and get.
Awesome. And then another real quick deferment question. Does salary made during deferment affect funding in graduate school?
Salary does not count as gift aid. However, salary will affect future family contribution, and that would affect what we can cover for you. So bear in mind that that is the case. Usually, but by the way, when you are in a program that offers a salary position, it will also have a gift aid component, such as a tuition reduction or tuition abatement. Sometimes it'll include health insurance.
Okay. Another question. If our graduate program isn't funded by GMS, what should be our next steps?
That's a good question. Again, this is Gabriel from AIGCS. If there's a graduate program that you're looking for that GMS doesn't cover, you know, I oftentimes think about, and I want to mention too that, you know, I was a GATE scholar myself from the cohort of 2002. So I've thought about some of these things myself. But in regards to that, I always advise scholars, if there's a graduate program that's outside of the 7 funded areas and the funding that GMS can provide, and that's truly what you want to do, you shouldn't allow the program to limit your exploration of your ultimate goals. And there's so much funding that's out there, and not to make it a general statement, but really it's applicable in that there's funding out there that can fund your program, whether it's departmental funding with the graduate program, the scholarship organizations, your organizations that have funding opportunities outside of GMS. There's ways to fund that. So whether you want to fund your program by GMS or outside of GMS, your goals are certainly relevant, and we as GATES staff members do acknowledge it, and we want you to reach your ultimate goals that you're seeking. So as an advice from me, again, as a GATES alumnus, I just want to say that, you know, don't let any limitations to your ultimate goals limit you. If you really want to pursue a particular graduate school, even though it's outside of GMS funding, I say go for it. And there's ways to fund it. There's ways to make that happen. But again, if it's outside of the 7 funded areas that GATES funds at the graduate level, whether it's master's, PhD, doctoral, education specialists, those sort of things, then look at those other ways to fund it and make it happen. And I encourage you to do so.
Okay, really quickly, in light of the pandemic and the loss of summer internships, as well as on-campus employment opportunities for grad scholars whose cost attendance is below the capped amount, will a provision be made for students to be able to apply for dispersal of the remainder to cover / offset costs for health insurance, dental insurance, and other costs incurred not factored in one's cost of attendance?
Could you repeat that question? I didn't hear all of it.
Sure. And I'll slow it down too, because I did go through that really fast. So in regarding the current state of the country with the pandemic going on, for graduate scholars whose cost of attendance is below the capped amount, will a provision be made for students to be able to apply for dispersal of the remainder of funds to offset costs for insurance and other costs incurred not factored in to one's cost of attendance? Health insurance, dental insurance, things like such.
The short answer is it has to be included in the cost of attendance for GMS to be able to cover it. If it's not there, or if it's costs that go beyond the cap, we're not likely going to be able to cover it for you. Now, the foundation made a special arrangement this year, and during the spring term, because the crisis happened so quickly and costs were incurred so quickly, the foundation agreed on a one-time basis to allow for some additional funding. And we've just closed that process. I would probably say that it's unlikely to be repeated, but it's up to the foundation in that case to make that determination. I would not count on it. So look at our guidelines and assume that if it's covered in our guidelines, that's going to be the status quo.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jay. Does GMS funding terminate after 10 years of your cohort, or does it extend all the way to the 28-29 semester year, given you've met all the GMS criteria using deferments?
$10 years of funding maximum.
Awesome. Is it possible to request an additional year of deferment if you are unable to get admission into a PhD program after year 3 of deferment and you are planning to reapply?
It is something that we have approved in the past when scholars have made a good faith effort to apply and have not been accepted into a program. But the one thing I will say is document. The committee wants to see that you made that attempt and that the programs you applied to did not accept you.
Awesome. My question just got away from me. One moment. Does my spouse's income count towards my EFC? Does this mean that I would have to pay for my graduate program portion of it first and then GMS covers the rest?
I can really take that one on. This is Gabriel from AIGCS. Jay kind of alluded to this earlier, but with regard to your income, when you complete your FAFSA every year, that does take into account your family income. If you're at the graduate level, it takes into your personal income, your family income if you're married. And that can affect the amount of your expected family contribution. So if you're making an amount that affects that, then that's not something that GMS can account for because GMS does not cover expected family contributions. That's what I can say about that if others have anything else.
Okay, I'll move over to Facebook really quickly. For graduate deferment, is there a cumulative maximum, for example, 2 years of teaching deferment and then 3 years of doctoral deferment?
Well, doctoral deferment is only offered when you are actually enrolled in a doctoral program. So it's 3 years of maximum of education or public health deferments and 1 year of your regular discretionary deferment type. And if you've used all of those, it's going to be case by case. We'll look at it. The committee is unlikely to offer a whole lot more than that, particularly as it becomes apparent that we're approaching the end of the funding.
Okay, I'm taking 2 questions and combining them into one with this one. If our program has completely gone online, will our funding be affected? How are laptop, internet costs being considered when determining our total funding? And also, does the cost of attendance with online programs include housing?
I'll go ahead and take that one on, Justin. This is Gabriel from AIGCS. With regard to your online programs, another thing that I wanted to mention earlier was with regard to your online programs, first and foremost, you want to make sure that any program you're entering, whether it's online or in person, it has to be a full-time graduate program. So that's not uncommon even with undergraduate programs, but I did want to mention that because with online programs, it may say that you're full-time, but really you need to check with your registrar's office to ensure that in fact that your online program is designated as a full-time program for GMS to account for that. With regards to laptop expenses, GMS does not cover for any computer-related expenses. That includes laptops. With housing, one thing I would say on that is you're studying online, oftentimes that's going to mean that you're likely going to have a cost of attendance that has a housing requirement that is off campus. So you want to check with your financial aid office to ensure what those numbers are. If I'm pursuing an online program that says I'm pursuing off-campus housing, I want to know what that amount is, so I understand what the financial aid office is going to report to GMS, and so I can plan accordingly. But the GMS awarding process, whether you're living on campus or off campus, is the same. For the scholar, you just want to make sure with the financial aid office what that number is. It could be the same if you're living on campus or off campus, whether it's online, an online program or not. Sometimes at institutions, that number could be different. So again, you want to just ensure you understand what those numbers are and how they're being reported to GMS, so that you're aware and that you can plan accordingly. And again, that conversation can happen with your financial aid office. And for many of the financial aid offices, there's already designated GMS staff members, or excuse me, staff members in the financial aid office that are aware that correspond with GMS on a regular basis, that understand how those policies are affected. So that's what I can say about that.
Okay, if we do not have a graduate assistantship, what do we submit for the document that the portal requests?
So if you don't have a graduate assistantship, then you don't need to submit any document if you don't have that particular request. The one reason why the system will have a requested action for you to submit a graduate assistantship document is if you, in your request funding form, submitted something that alluded to that effect. So if you said that I do have a graduate assistantship and input something there, then that would generate a requested action for a graduate assistantship. Otherwise, there's no document that's needed to be processed. And if there is a discrepancy there where you submit a request funding form and you don't have a graduate assistantship, but there's a requested action for an assistantship document, then you want to follow up with your partner organization and just inform them of that so that they can correct the action and take that requested action off your scholar profile.
Actually, let me add to that, that if you report a scholarship, a departmental scholarship, you're going to get that request as well. And in that case, just send your award letter.
Awesome. Sorry, I had my question. I lost it, guys. Give me 1 second. I think it was answered, actually. So we will go here. I'm currently on extended deferment. I'm trying to complete the renewal form. Hasn't been working for me. During the 2019-20 academic year, I have been working full time. The form only allows me to choose my current institution, and I currently don't have one. What should I do?
Melissa, you want to take this one?
Sure. You can leave your institution as the one that you were last enrolled at in the portal. If you're requesting deferment this time around.
If you're
Okay.
requesting funding, this is the issue that Melissa mentioned earlier. It may not allow you to request funding if you had a different institution before. So just check with your office, whichever your office is, and they can change the institution to reflect the one you'll be entering. And you should be able to request funding at that point.
In the summer funding request packet, the last page asks for dollar amounts in certain funding areas. Are those supposed to be in regards to the award from the previous academic year, or those estimates for the summer funding?
Actually, that's a question that should probably be answered by one of our summer funding people who are on the call but are not necessarily on the panel.
I can answer that.
Yeah, go right ahead, Martha.
Okay, and that is the same as when you submit your funds that you're receiving in your graduate assistantship or your award letters or anything like that. So you should provide documentation supporting that, those institutional awards or whatever amounts that you had put in your request for funding. But you do not put in the monies that you receive from the Gates Millennium Scholarship Program.
Okay, thank you for that, Martha. Just looking at some duplicate questions. Guys, we'll probably, just a heads up for those who are still on the call, we're gonna go for about 8 to 10 more minutes to field your questions. Can you explain what the GMS award process looks like from the perspective of the school financial aid office? Is the school notified automatically, or should I follow up after I submit my part for renewal?
I can answer that, Justin. This is Gabriel from AHECS. So with regard to the perspective from your financial aid office, when a scholar goes in and submits their request for funding, at the time that you submit that request for funding, your name pops up on the roster for every institution, or for the respective institution's financial aid office, and it says that, for example, if I submit a request funding for a particular school, my name will show up in that particular school's institution portal where the financial aid office staff has access to that, and it'll say, look, Gabriel submitted their request funding form. Now he's now able to get his financial aid and academic information submitted via the GMS institution portal. So then the financial aid office will then see that prompt, and they can, at that point, go in and submit your academic information and your financial aid information, which includes your cost of attendance, any other scholarships or financial aid that you're receiving. Now, while that's available, a financial aid staff member that's aware of the GMS process may not see that automatically. So I always recommend scholars to, again, communicate with the financial aid office. If you already have a relationship with somebody there, you want to go ahead and leverage that relationship to, again, let them know that, hey, I submitted my request funding form. I'm ready to be certified in the GMS institution portal. So as a scholar, once you communicate with them, that will let them know additionally, in addition to what they can already see, but maybe they're not looking at it readily, but they say, okay, well, Gabe, he's ready to be certified. So let me, as a financial aid office staff member, go in and certify Gabriel. So, you know, some institutions are good about that. You know, the staff members are there to accommodate those requests that are submitted via the GMS institution portal. You may be at an institution where that doesn't occur as quickly as you like, so you might just want to just rattle their cage, so to speak, and let them know that you're ready to be certified, and that'll let them know they can go on there and provide the information that they can. So that's the perspective from the financial aid office. They have access to see it, but considering the time of the academic year, they might not be looking at it readily. And so it's helpful for you as a GATE scholar to just, again, be proactive and reach out to your financial aid staff to let them know that you did submit your funding request and that you're ready to be certified in the GMS institution portal. They'll understand what that means, and they'll go in and provide the information to GMS.
Okay. We'll run through a few more questions. If I pursue a master's in a field not funded by GMS, can I request deferment for the time it takes to complete and still be eligible for a PhD funded by GMS?
The answer to that is it depends. We'd have to look at the circumstances. Depends on how long the program is, and we'd expect you to make a case that you need that particular degree for your doctoral program. In most cases, the committee is unlikely to approve time away to pursue something we don't fund and then come back to pursue something we do fund. Our recommendation is generally seek out what you can be funded for from GMS. And then if you want to pursue something that GMS does not fund, do it after.
Awesome. Okay. Would it be possible to use 2 years of master's funding in a different area? Wait, this might be the same question. Well, I'll ask it. Would it be possible to use the 2 years of master's funding in a different area after graduating with a doctoral degree if one went directly to PhD from undergrad? Different question.
The answer is once you complete your PhD, we do not fund at this point programs that are less than the PhD, with one exception. The one exception is we will allow those with PhD to be considered for 1 year of teaching certification. That's the only thing we'll fund after the PhD.
Awesome. Okay, a few more questions, guys. We have about 4 or 5 minutes.
Oh, can I jump in? Because
Yes,
I saw
please.
a question from a student that has a question about what's basically an accelerated program where there's the students pursuing both a bachelor's and a master's that will be awarded simultaneously. We actually do have a special arrangement for those programs, and we will look at them because it depends on what the program is in as to how we treat it. But we do offer an option, and our suggestion is talk to your particular office about your particular program and circumstances. The one that I looked at seemed to be a program in electrical engineering, and we will consider funding for you. There's a special arrangement. Better for you to talk to us directly about that, and we'll be happy to explain how it works for you.
Okay. In my renewal email, it said that I'm scheduled to graduate this year, even though I am in a doctoral program and it has only been 2 years. Can I renew as I normally do online, or is there something that I need to discuss with GMS?
If you think there's a discrepancy,
I was just gonna say, this is Gabriel from AAGCS. With regard to that, and again, Jay, you can chime in here. If you're submitting, or if you're projected to graduate at a certain time, maybe you submitted that prior to, or you submitted a graduation date in your request funding form. If that should change, you can certainly request your funding going forward. We understand that sometimes those graduation dates can change. So we'll go off the most immediate and current information that you have provided, and we proceed accordingly, provided that you still have funding eligibility at current education level.
Okay, quick question on deferment. If I've been accepted into a PhD program after using teaching deferment in the previous years, does this mean I would not be eligible for the doctoral deferral moving forward? Or would this be case by case?
Okay, I'm a little unclear on what he's asking. If the doctoral deferment is basically when you're in the program and you have funding that covers all your need and you don't need GMS, you can request doctoral deferments, and that will actually give you an extra year, to complete your degree if you've used other funding for one of those years. If that's not what the question was asking, then I'm unclear on what the question is asking.
Okay, that was through Facebook, so that'll probably have a slight delay. So if not, we can just follow up with that. Scholar, guys, any more questions? Really quickly, if you want to type something in, we have just a few moments.
We have plenty of questions, I think, that we're still answering through the Q&A. We have about 13 left, so we're trying to answer those. So no more questions.
Okay, well, no more questions. I will ask.
Melissa and I have been answering behind the scenes while Gabe and Jay have been graciously answering live. So we've been answering behind, and Martha as well. So we've had, I think, over 75 questions that we've attempted to answer. I think we have 13 left, so we can try to.
I think some of them we may have answered live of the 13 that are left.
So I see this question. We may have touched on this, but does the graduate funding amount adjust for inflation in the future?
I'm going to answer that. This is Gabriel from AIGCS. So as I mentioned, my portion of the presentation, when you look at the graduate capped amounts in the request funding packet, those capped amounts are updated every year. And so those account for any adjustments that occur nationwide. That capped amount that GMS allows for oftentimes increases and may stay the same. But as far as your question on whether it adjusts for inflation, it does adjust for increased amounts that GATE scholars are incurring there. And so just know that GMS is looking at that and looking at the increased costs for GATE scholars across the nation. So that's what I can say about that.
Okay, really quickly, what do I do if my doctoral program starts in the summertime?
If your doctoral program starts in the summertime, GMS is designed to account for graduate programs, whether it's master's, doctoral, or PhD, to begin in the fall term. So it's not set up to account for a summer term for graduate programs that start in the summer because the GATE scholarship academic year is set in a fall, winter, spring, then summer academic year. And the reason for that is because GMS is designed to allow for any leftover from the capped amount to be applied for the summer funding. So whatever's left over from the academic year can be applied towards summer funding as a trailer. There's no way to account for a graduate program that starts in the summer if there hasn't been any leftover amount from the academic year. So GMS does not fund for graduate programs, master or doctoral, that begin in the summer term.
However, this is Julie Kim. I would like to piggyback on that answer. GMS is aware that across the country due to COVID, some institutions are starting the academic year earlier than they have traditionally have been. So if the academic year starts in July, then we will not look at that as summer beginning. That is simply an academic year starting earlier. So I hope scholars do make that differentiation. What Gabe explained is absolutely true. However, we are aware that certain institutions are opening earlier than others. So that in that case, we will look at early starting institutions as regular academic year. Hope that clarifies.
Okay, so I'll ask this final question. I know we're still engaging you guys in the Q&A portion, but I'll ask this last question live. Do we still qualify for funding if the tuition in our graduate program is waived? Will cost of living still be supported by Gates?
If the tuition is what?
If the tuition for their program is waived.
Waived? We'll look at it, and it's very possible that you still have need, and we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis. Tuition is often waived if you have an assistantship or sometimes a research fellowship.
Awesome. Okay, so it's 8:30. I definitely want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know there were some questions that we probably didn't get answered going back and forth through Facebook. I'll still be in Facebook once this is over, answering some questions and following up with students. I do want to let students know that this was recorded. You'll be able to replay it in Facebook. I will post it on the Gates YouTube channel as well. So you'll be able to hear all of the answers, see all of these questions repeatedly. For those of you who had some specific ones that maybe didn't get answered on live, please feel free to reach out to your respective representative to follow up. We want to make sure that you guys have all the tools and all the necessary information that you need to be successful and move forward in completion of your coursework. So what I'll do now, guys, I will stay on. Scholars, if you have questions, please follow up. We're going to go ahead and end this for tonight. There will be some follow-up webinars to talk about some things in more specific detail, so stay tuned for that. Also, this week, tomorrow, there'll be an entrepreneurship event hosted by the Gates Millennium Alumni Association. That's at 6 o'clock tomorrow, as well as virtual commencement will be Saturday at 2. So, guys, stay tuned to your emails. Just please be cognizant of all the events that are going on. Also, many of you have gotten an email regarding the Chase course, which is online. Be mindful of that. Take that. Definitely some good financial literacy topics within that course. It's presented through Schoology. If you have any questions, you can email me directly. That's not a problem. With that being said, I'm going to head and we'll go ahead and dissolve. Scholars, I appreciate you guys coming on tonight. We're going to be as diligent as possible with answering all of your questions and all of your concerns, so please bear with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night, guys.
Have a great year, guys.